Lolita, light of my life, fire of my loins, my sin, my soul, Lolita.
Hello everyone, it is Skylar, and today I am back with another video after a very long time. I think I just got very preoccupied in my own life because I'm in college, I'm studying abroad. Well, I just studied abroad, I just got back a few months ago, and my brain's been all over the place thinking about who I am. But now I am back, I'm making another video, and I thought it would be a good idea to make a video that a lot of people have been wanting, I guess. I think a lot of people are really interested in this topic, so I thought I should make a video about it. So today I'm going to be talking about what exactly the word Nymphet means. Of course, Lolita and this whole Nymphet debate is very controversial. If you say something wrong about it, something that doesn't match other people's opinions, they can snap. And yeah, it makes it sort of difficult to talk about. A lot of these people will say, well, okay, just look at the Google definition, because if Google says it's right, it's obviously right, right? I'm gonna prove that that's pretty bullshit today. A lot of people also want to go to Humbert, because in the book it was sort of made that Humbert sort of came up with this word. So people will say, well, because Humbert says that nymphets are between 9 and 14 and they have all of these requirements, this is what Nymphet means. But that's not exactly correct either. And I found this out by doing my own research. Now, I'm not going to say that I'm 100% correct, because literary concepts like these are really meant to be debated, I think. You're meant to think about them, you're meant to talk to other people about them. As long as you have any sort of valid evidence for what your opinion of Nymphet is, then it's valid. So I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm 100% right, and if someone disagrees with me, they're wrong. But yeah, I'm going to try to disprove some common definitions that Nymphet might get. So for my research, I chose to only look at Nabokov's own words. So I looked at interviews he did, I looked at other works he did. Although people write entire essays on what the word Nymphet even means, I just wanted to go directly to the source of where this word originated from. So I thought it only made sense to just go directly to Nabokov instead of trying to decipher through other people's opinions. But I'm going to be linking everything down in the description. So one more thing before I really start. I don't say Nymphet fashion while trying to mean the original meaning of Nymphet. If it wasn't for Japanese magazines such as Larme and Cutie, and also of course the 1997 movie, just the way they chose to dress Lolita, I wouldn't be into Nymphet fashion. So just understand when I say Nymphet fashion, I'm not talking about it in its original meaning. And I think some people might say that that's sort of bullshit and you can't really go around changing words. But I think as you watch this video, you'll see that words like Lolita and Nymphet have already been twisted and turned into weird meanings that really aren't okay. So let's begin. So when I decided that I wanted to dig deeper and figure out what the word Nymphet meant, I decided to strictly look at Lolita. So I figured I would read the novel anytime Humbert would say, okay, a Nymphet is all of these different requirements. So I took the 9 to 14 thing extremely seriously, but I realized as I was going on that just didn't make a lot of sense. Just the way Humbert was using the word Nymphet and putting all of these weird requirements onto it. It's like he started to contradict himself. So, for example, there was a part in the book, and now understand I'm gonna give some spoilers. There was a part in the book where Humbert's talking about trying to get with a child prostitute. Yeah, that happened. Let me just read the line here. So let her remain sleek, slender Monique is the child prostitute, as she was for a minute or two, a delinquent Nymphet shining through the matter-of-fact young whore. And see, before this, when Humbert met up with Monique, just on the street, it was really weird, but he met up with her on the street and they go back to the what's it called, like a whorehouse, I guess, whatever. And she tells him that she's 18. But then Humbert goes on to say, well, she's probably adding at least a year or two. So this would make her between like 15, 16, but she's saying that she's 18. So she could be anywhere between 15 to 18. This is out of his 9 to 14 requirements, and he's still saying, at least for a minute or two, she was a Nymphet. So right there, he's already contradicting himself. I feel like through moments like these, it really started to become obvious that what a Nymphet was to him was all physical sort of things. It was just his own ideals, just like personally his. Another thing we also have to think about is the fact that Lolita is meant to be a story that can happen like today. It's not any sort of sci-fi sort of thing. There aren't crazy events that would be impossible to happen in real life. So the fact that Humbert's trying to say that Nymphets are these demonic, like mythical, otherworldly sort of beings sort of just proves that Nymphets aren't exactly real. It's all like just made up in his head. He's using the word Nymphet in order to just place the blame of his actions onto the girl, because of course he said that he would never do things with an ordinary child, but a Nymphet is different because they aren't just normal children. But it just doesn't make sense in a real world context, because I think like everyone knows that little girls are little girls, that's it, period. There's no like secret nymph among us. That's weird. So when I decided that just reading Lolita and taking notes on what Humbert said Nymphets were just wasn't enough. So then I decided to look at Nabokov and like interviews he did. I originally thought that Nymphets were a thing that was only in the world of Lolita. So Nymphets didn't exist except in the world of Lolita. But in an interview I found that Nabokov did, he said this. So just for background context too, because I think this is sort of needed, Nabokov here is talking about the author of Alice in Wonderland, because the author, I think his name was Lewis Carroll, he did some extremely weird photo shoots with really young girls, and there are debates on whether he's like a pedo or not, but looking at these photo shoots, it's really scandalous looking, but that's a whole other thing and I'm not going to get into it. But anyway, this is what Nabokov said. So, his were sad, scrawny little Nymphets, bedraggled and half undressed or rather semi-undraped, as if participating in some dusty and dreadful charade. So here we can see Nabokov is directly saying that Lewis Carroll's Nymphets was this certain thing. They had these certain requirements. So from him saying that like his Nymphets are this, we can also sort of assume that we could also say that, well, Humbert's Nymphets were or had all of these sort of requirements. So we can see that the whole requirements thing is, there aren't exactly requirements. It's all in the heads of predators. And also the girls that Lewis Carroll like photographed and like with himself too, they were extremely young. I'm gonna say younger than 9 to 14. And Nabokov is still saying Nymphets in this case. I think we can see from this that the whole 9 to 14 thing just doesn't work. We could see that in Humbert's case that might be true to him, but in Lewis Carroll's, they were different. This is a gross topic, okay. Now, I'm going to explain why the Google definition / Merriam Webster definition of Nymphet is wrong if we're talking about it in the original sense. So let me just read off what Google says and Merriam Webster. So Google said that a Nymphet is an attractive and sexually mature young girl. Then Merriam Webster said a sexually precocious girl barely in her teens. Also a sexually attractive young woman. And then under the definition it said first known use of Nymphet in 1955, so it's talking about the novel because that's when the novel was published. And it said, in the meaning defined above. So they're saying that in the novel, this is the way Nymphet was used. So, like, that's weird. Can we just agree that this is incorrect? But everyone wants to say that Google's correct because it's Google. But stop, please. And Nabokov had his own words to say about exactly these definitions. He literally talks about Merriam Webster in some interviews. So I'm going to read them now. The interviewer asked Nabokov, like, what connection does his interest in butterflies have in relation to, like, his own works, his novels. And this is what Nabokov said. I have reworked the classification of various groups of butterflies, have described and figured several species and subspecies. My names for the microscopic organs that I have been the first to sec and portray have safely found their ways into biological dictionaries. Compare this to the wretched entry under Nymphet in Webster's latest edition. From this we can see that Nabokov wasn't exactly happy from the Webster edition. And Nabokov trash talking, Webster doesn't even stop there. In another interview, he goes on to say this. I think that the harmful drudges who define today in popular dictionaries the word nymphet as a very young but sexually attractive girl without any additional comment or reference should have their knuckles rapped. So, can we agree that the Google definition is not correct? I think everyone should be going to Nabokov when we're trying to say, like, what the original definition of nymphet is. We shouldn't go to Daddy Google because Google's always correct. Even, like, Merriam Webster, there's supposed to be some amazing factual website, right? But even they mess it up. There's no additional comment saying, well, nymphet was changed in this way based on contemporary uses of it. It just flat out says nymphets are sexually attractive young girls, and it was first used in 1955 in Vladimir Nabokov's novel Lolita. So that's pretty fucked, because Nabokov, you know, the one who made the word nymphet, is saying that Google and Merriam Webster are incorrect about the definition of it. Can we stop saying that nymphets are sexually attractive young girls? Does everyone realize how gross that is? This definition sounds like Humbert Humbert himself wrote the definition. It sounds like everyone's trying to place the blame onto little girls. And even, I think Merriam Webster it was, they said they were attractive young women. Women? They're little girls. It's oh man. It's rough. Okay. Anyway, I decided to go on, and I also looked up the definition of Lolita. Webster gave us this definition: a precociously seductive girl. So, I think we can agree that the definitions they're giving for Nymphet and Lolita are basically the same. But under Lolita, they actually do give some sort of comment, which I thought was interesting. So, I'm gonna read their comment now. In some cases, it can be disconcerting when an eponym strays in meaning. So here we can see that at least they're saying that this isn't the original meaning of Lolita. Really, Lolita didn't have any sort of meaning like that. It's just the nickname Humbert gave Dolores Hayes. So, like, I don't know. Anyway, they go on to say, in Vladimir Nabokov's 1955 novel Lolita, the character Lolita is a child who is sexually victimized by the book's narrator. That's good. That's a good comment. Thank you. The word Lolita has, however, strayed from its original referent, obviously, and has settled into the language as a term we define as precociously seductive girl. Why? And they go on to explain why. This definition is based on a considerable body of evidence of the word as it is used in published English prose. It is not intended to be a lexicographic reflection of Nabokov's creation. And under this part, they list out, like, it look like maybe like movie descriptions or something like that. And in the descriptions, they describe some of the girls as being like modern Lolitas, or this girl's a Lolita because she's sexual and whatever. Basically, Webster themselves is saying that this definition of Lolita isn't the original one, but we're saying this because this is how the media sort of turned the word Lolita into. And I know I'm talking about the word Lolita right now, but because the definition of Lolita that they have is basically the same as Nymphet, it can be suggested that we can say that this comment should also be on the Nymphet page of their definition. And really, it's not like I would have an issue with these definitions if they would also list the original meaning, because it can be argued that because the media and society itself turned words like Nymphet and Lolita into something very sexual, that now we can say that Nymphet and Lolita are sort of sexual terms. It's gross because we're talking about a novel between a 12-year-old and a 37 or 38-year-old, but that's what happened. But because they don't even list the original meaning of the word Nymphet, I think that they should really go back and reflect upon themselves, especially when we're talking about their entry for Nymphet. They don't give any of these comments. They only do this under Lolita, so you have to dig even further in order to figure out all of this mess. It's horrible. And Nabokov himself sort of knew that people would take these sort of words and run with them and put different sort of meanings onto them, because I found an interview he did that talks about exactly that. The interviewer asked, "Do nymphets exist? Was this a figment of your imagination, or has it got some basis in fact?" So this is what Nabokov said. "It was a figment of my imagination, but I suppose they will exist now, as often happens. Say, a painter draws a fog on a river. Then the man sees a fog on the river and says, oh, that's just like Turner's, that's his kind of fog. And so everybody starts to see the fog in terms of the picture which first expressed it. I suppose that's the same thing with those graceful girls, of which that particular Nymphet is a representative. So basically, Nabokov's explaining that people are going to see the word Nymphet, and then basically once let's say one huge media source starts using the word Nymphet in this particular way, and then all of their little minions are going to see this and be like, oh yeah, this is totally the meaning of Nymphet. But we have to remember that this isn't the original meaning. Even when I say Nymphet fashion, I'm not saying it with the original meaning. Or, of course, we can talk about Japanese Lolita fashion. They don't use the word Lolita in its original meaning, which is okay. It's not like it's a bad thing. It's just that we have to always remind people, no, I'm not trying to be an original Nymphet. I'll say it's not okay when you're actually literally sexualizing the whole 12-year-old and literal adult man relationship. That's weird, but if it's being used in an okay way, then I don't see an issue with it. You just have to be clear that you're not using the original definition. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to other interviews Nabokov did. In these interviews, he was a lot harsher towards the media, with them sort of changing words like Nymphet and Lolita into just being wrong in general. So here's the first line I have. Humbert was fond of little girls, not simply young girls. Nymphets are girl children, not starlets and sex kittens. Lolita is 12, not 18, when Humbert met her. So this line really reminds me of how today we can see a lot of girls asking other girls in the Nymphet community or whatever, well, can I be a Nymphet? I'm this old, or I look like this. First off, I would tell you that you shouldn't want to be a Nymphet. I don't know why you would want to get preyed on by a literal predator. But second, if you're an adult, like it's out, you're out. Nymphets are little girls. They're children. They're not young women. Let me move on to another interview. And it is interesting to consider, as the journalists say, the problem of the silly degradation that the character of the Nymphet that I invented in 1955 has suffered among the great public. Not only the perversity of the poor creature was grotesquely exaggerated, but the physical aspect, age, everything was modified by illustrations and foreign publications. This line sort of reminds me of how some covers of the Book of Lolita were changed in a very strange sort of way. As in, on some covers, the person representing Lolita looks extremely old and mature. Let me go on. Girls from 20 years old to more, street cheap models or simple long-legged criminals are called nymphs or Lolitas in Italian, French, German magazines, etc. And the covers of the Turkish or Arab translations. So if I didn't put those up before, I'm gonna put them up now. Street cheap models or simple long-legged criminals are called nymphets or Lolitas. They represent a young woman with opulent contours, as said before, with blonde hair imagined by idiots who never read the book. And now for my last interview I have with Nabokov here. I think that this particular line really drives home the original meaning of Nymphet, so let me read this. Out of Mr. Humbert's manic gaze, there is no Nymphet. Lolita, the Nymphet, only exists through the obsession that destroys Humbert. This is an essential aspect of a singular book that has been falsified by an artificial popularity. This is probably the most important of the interviews that I mentioned throughout this whole thing. Right here, Nabokov is telling us that Nymphets are all in the minds of predators. Lolita, and understand that he's saying Lolita here, especially now, because Humbert put this name onto her. And he put this name onto her as like sort of her Nymphet name, if that makes sense, in order to take away the humanness of her and put in like a more Nymphet her. Because Lolita's only called Lolita by Humbert. This is Humbert's doing. It's Humbert saying that Dolores is a Nymphet, when in fact she's just a 12-year-old girl. That's it, period. And then once again Nabokov goes on to say how people or the media or society went on to change the meaning of Nymphet and Lolita in order to just satisfy like their own ones of what they want to do with the word and just completely disregard the original meaning. So we ended up with Google definitions such as a sexually attractive young girl or a precociously seductive young girl. Just really weird definitions. Don't know why you would want to call a young girl sexually attractive, but... So now that I talked about all these different interviews and gave you all this information about what a Nymphet is, what it isn't, I'm going to try and tell you my own definition of Nymphet based on all of my research. So my definition is, a little girl that is being viewed or abused in a sexual manner by an adult who deems her as his own personal definition of a nymphet. So, let me break it up. First, from the interviews we've seen with Nabokov, nymphets are little girls. They're not teens and they're not young women. Another thing I want to point out about my definition is the fact that girls themselves, we, in its original meaning of course, cannot say that we are nymphets. Nymphets do not exist without their predator counterpart because in order to be a nymphet you have to be preyed on, you know? And I guess I'm specifically outing all of the girls who are saying, oh, I'm into older men and I have daddy kinks and I have X, Y, and Z kinks. That does not make you a nymphet. Nymphets don't have these sort of personality traits. There is no real personality trait when it comes to being a nymphet. Because I see a good amount of people saying, well, nymphets are girls who are into older guys. That's not how it works. At least in the original meaning, if you want to take the word nymphet and make it into a fucked up version of it, then that's on you to sexualize a book that's about a 12-year-old and a 37 or 38-year-old. And it's so disappointing when I see people on Instagram and they tag their like nymphet fashion photos with also like DDLG or daddy kink or whatever else. That makes me cringe every time I see that. If you want to like nymphet fashion, that's just fine. Liking clothes is okay. Just don't be sexual about it. That's weird. Yeah, anyway, let me move on to my last point about my definition. So at the end of my definition, I mentioned an adult having their own personal definition of nymphet, and I know it's really weird to have nymphet also in the definition of nymphet, but let me explain now. So from the first interview I mentioned when we were talking about the author of Alice in Wonderland, when Nabokov said, well, his nymphets were these, we can also make the conclusion that Humbert's nymphets were something different. So nymphets are going to change depending on the predator. There are no strict requirements other than be a little girl, a child who's getting preyed on. That's literally it. That's what nymphet means. To conclude, I have some takeaways for everyone. 1, don't use the Google definition or Webster's definition of nymphet if we're talking about nymphet in its original form. If you want to say that people are using words like nymphet and Lolita in sexualized ways because the media and society itself sexualized Lolita, then that's one thing. However, if we're referring to Lolita and Nymphet in terms of the novel itself, that's not what it means. It's incorrect. The author of Lolita himself said that these definitions are bullshit and they make him really angry. So let's stop using those. 2, don't mix DDLG and Nymphet. This is probably gonna get me some slack or whatever. I don't care what adults do in the bedroom. I don't care if you're into DDLG. However, if you're going to mix it with a book about a 12-year-old and a 37-year-old, that's weird. That's not what Dolores was. She wasn't. I know everyone has this idea of well, Dolores was into older guys and I like older guys too and therefore I'm a nymphet. Stop. I should make a whole video on if Dolores likes older guys or not. But that's not true. I'll say that in a short way. It's like, I'm not going to side-eye you if you like shooter games or whatever, or scary movies, but if you start to make weird connections and say things like, oh, I'm gonna blow up and shoot up the skull and it's just gonna be like this shooter game at Eric Harris, you know, you can't make those weird connections. It's okay to like things that might be seen as controversial. It's okay to appreciate art. That is fine. Appreciating art is not a big deal at all. It's just when you make things that shouldn't be sexualized. So I think I said everything I needed to say. I have a feeling I could totally make a part 2 to this, and I also know that I'm not a perfect human being. Maybe I made some sort of mistakes, so if you think that I made any sort of mistake, or if you have any opinions yourself about what nymphet means, then I would really like to hear them in the comments, so please leave me a comment about that if you would like. I'll end my long-ass video here. I'm sure I'm going to enjoy editing this, so I hope I will make another video soon. I'm sorry, I was dead for a long time. I'll try not to be dead anymore. Okay, I guess I'm gonna go now and probably be dead. So, bye!